Hello, I'm Adam Newman. This is my official YouTube channel. Please subscribe and support us.
There are some storylines that feel built for spectacle, and then there are storylines that feel built to expose a character from the inside out. Nick's descent into addiction belongs to the second category. It is not frightening merely because of the substance itself, although fentanyl carries a terror that is immediate and impossible to romanticize. It is frightening because of what it means for a man like Nick, a man who has spent years presenting himself as one of the steadier members of the Newman family, to discover that self-control can become an illusion overnight. In a family where power is inherited like blood and damage is inherited, the same way this kind of collapse does not arrive as an isolated event. It arrives like a curse returning to collect on an old debt. From the outside, Genoa City always makes ruin look elegant. The suits are pressed, the offices gleam, the family names carry weight, and the public image remains polished even when private lives are cracking beneath the surface. That is exactly why Nick's spiral has the potential to become one of the darkest and most emotionally truthful turns the show can take. His downfall does not begin in some alley or some obviously reckless environment. It begins in the familiar territory of pressure, pain, secrecy, pride, and the fatal belief that a strong man can manage what is slowly poisoning him. That is how the most devastating implosions usually begin. Not with a scream, but with a lie, told quietly enough that even the liar wants to believe it. Nick has always occupied an uneasy space within the Newman dynasty. He is not as ruthlessly cold as Victor, not as openly damaged as Adam, not as visibly fragile as Nikki at her lowest, and not as calculating as Victoria when the family business becomes war. For years, that has made him seem like the reliable center, the son who could walk away from the dynasty and still somehow remain bound to it. But reliability can become its own prison. The person everyone assumes will hold up under pressure is often the one least allowed to admit he is drowning. Nick's tragedy in this version of the story is not simply that he touches fentanyl. It is that by the time he understands what it is doing to him, he has already built an emotional structure around denial. He is not just hiding pills. He is hiding humiliation, dependency, fear, anger, and the unbearable possibility that he is becoming the very kind of cautionary tale he once thought happened to other people. That is where the story becomes larger than scandal. It becomes about legacy. Nikki's history with addiction hangs over this narrative like a ghost with a familiar face. She knows too much about what substances can do to a body, to a mind, to a family. She knows how quickly one secret multiplies into 10. She knows the strange, poisonous rhythm of addiction, the way shame feeds the habit, and the habit feeds the shame until truth itself begins to feel like an enemy. If anyone can recognize the signs in Nick before the rest of the family stops pretending not to see them, it is Nikki. But that recognition would not come with simple comfort. It would come with horror, guilt, and a deeply personal grief. There is something especially cruel about a mother who fought her own demons for decades, having to watch her son inherit not the exact same addiction, but the same hunger to escape. And escape is the real engine of this storyline. Nick is not the kind of man who would wake up one morning and decide to destroy himself. The far more painful truth is that he would convince himself he is only trying to get through one more day. One more hit to steady his nerves. One more pill to take the edge off. One more moment of false calm so he can keep functioning, keep protecting the people around him, keep waging whatever battle is already tearing at him from the inside. The most convincing tragedies are built on understandable decisions that grow monstrous through repetition. That is why this arc has such brutal potential. Nick does not need to become someone unrecognizable overnight. He only needs to become slightly less honest with himself each day. In that sense, Matt becomes more than an antagonist. He becomes a trigger, a mirror, and a predator who senses weakness at exactly the wrong moment. If Nick is already under pressure, already battling pain, fear, and private instability, then Matt's presence can sharpen every bad instinct Nick has. Rage becomes easier, paranoia becomes easier, isolation becomes easier. The need to control the narrative becomes desperate. A man under threat who is also chemically compromised is not just vulnerable to being attacked, he is vulnerable to becoming reckless enough to destroy himself while believing he is fighting back. That is the rich, dramatic territory here. Matt does not have to force Nick into darkness if he can simply keep nudging him toward it and wait for Nick's pride to do the rest. That is also why I think this story works best if it refuses to make Nick either a saint or a monster. The strongest version of this arc would allow him to be sympathetic and infuriating at the same time. Addiction does not only make a person weak, it can make them manipulative, evasive, cruel, irrational, and frighteningly selfish in moments when survival feels more urgent than love. If the show wants real impact, it should not protect Nick from that truth. It should let him hurt people who are trying to help him. It should let him snap at concern, weaponize other people's flaws, to distract from his own, and make choices so reckless that even the audience feels angry with him. That anger would not weaken the story, it would deepen it. A sanitized collapse teaches nothing. A messy, painful one forces everyone watching to confront how dependency distorts character without erasing humanity. Sharon would be one of the first people to sense the shift, and that instinct alone could carry enormous emotional weight. Few people know Nick's emotional rhythms better than Sharon. She would notice the tension that no smile can fully cover, the strange impatience, the defensiveness, the moments when his eyes seem fixed on some internal urgency stronger than whatever conversation is happening in front of him. But Sharon's role should not be written as simple savior. That would be too easy and too familiar. A more powerful direction would let Sharon recognize what is happening and still find herself torn between compassion and fury. She has seen too much damage in too many forms to romanticize what Nick is doing. She would understand the pain behind it, but she would also understand the danger of enabling it, excusing it, or sacrificing her own emotional stability to manage his downfall for him. That conflict could become devastating if Nick starts using emotional history as a shield. A man in denial often reaches for the places where he knows he can still be loved. He leans on shared memories, unfinished tenderness, old loyalty. He makes the people closest to him feel responsible for not abandoning him, even while he is the one breaking trust. If Nick begins doing that with Sharon, the story becomes even more painful because it stops being only about drugs and starts being about emotional coercion. Not deliberate villainy, perhaps, but the dark, desperate instinct to hold on to someone by any means necessary when everything else is slipping out of control. Then there is Victor, whose response could define the entire emotional landscape of the Newman family. A father like Victor does not interpret vulnerability as ordinary pain. He interprets it as a threat to the family structure, to the family image, to the mythology of strength he has spent decades building around the Newman name. His first instinct would likely be control. Solve the problem. Hide the weakness, eliminate the external threat, crush Matt, contain the scandal, manage Nick. But addiction is one of the few enemies money, intimidation, and strategy cannot simply overpower. That is what makes this storyline especially potent for Victor. It challenges the illusion that every crisis can be turned into a battlefield where power guarantees victory. Nick's body does not care about Victor's influence. Nick's chemistry cannot be negotiated with. That kind of helplessness would make Victor angrier than ever because beneath all his authority is the terror of a patriarch who cannot command reality to obey him. Victoria's position in the story could be equally complicated. She is practical, disciplined, and ruthlessly aware of how personal weakness can destabilize the larger structure around the family. Part of her would be horrified for her brother. Another part of her would be furious that he let himself become compromised at all. And beneath both reactions would be the cold executive calculation she has inherited from Victor. What damage can this do? Who can weaponize it? And how quickly can it spread? That may sound harsh, but it is exactly the kind of emotional truth that keeps family stories from becoming sentimental. Love inside the Newman family rarely comes pure. It comes tangled with judgment, rivalry, disappointment, old wounds, and the permanent fear that one person's collapse can trigger a chain reaction through everyone else's life. Adam, however, is where the story could become truly explosive. No one understands the Newman family's hypocrisy quite like Adam, and no one would be more dangerous standing near Nick's addiction because Adam would recognize things others miss. He would see how quickly a family that has judged him for years might suddenly rush to protect Nick under the language of compassion. He would see the double standards immediately. Yet Adam is also one of the few people who genuinely knows what it means to be treated like the family's damaged son. That creates a fascinating emotional fault line. He could become Nick's harshest critic or his most unexpected ally. Maybe both. He could despise Nick's lies while also recognizing the panic underneath them. He could resent the family for protecting Nick in ways they never protected him while still refusing to let Nick die. That contradiction would feel painfully right for both brothers. In fact, some of the best tension in this arc would come from Nick realizing he hates needing help from the very people whose judgments matter most to him. Pride is often more poisonous than the substance itself because pride convinces a person that confession is a greater humiliation than self-destruction. Nick could keep telling himself he still has time, still has control, still has one more chance to fix the mess before anyone else has to know, but addiction thrives in delay. The longer he waits, the more his choices grow erratic. He misses things, he lashes out, he misreads danger, he makes stupid decisions in situations where one bad second can change everything. That is how the plot should tighten around him. Not through one grand revelation immediately, but through accumulating failures that make denial impossible. A forgotten promise, a nearly exposed secret, a moment of visible withdrawal, a dangerous misstep in the middle of trying to outmaneuver Matt, A confrontation that turns uglier than expected because Nick is not thinking clearly. A family gathering where his temper flashes too fast and too hard. A private scene where he stares at himself and realizes, if only for a second, that he looks like someone he used to pity. Those are the moments that turn a storyline into a descent. I also think it matters that the show not rush toward rescue too soon. The temptation with a socially relevant storyline is often to announce the seriousness of the issue and then hurry toward the healing message. But the emotional value lies in the middle, in the degradation, in the damage, in the consequences that cannot be neatly erased. If Nick is going to walk through hell, then the audience needs to feel the heat. He should lose credibility. He should fracture trust. He should make choices that humiliate him. He should discover that addiction is not just a private problem, but a force that reorders how others see him. A man who once carried himself with confidence now becomes the man people watch carefully, doubt quietly, and fear, leaving alone with his own thoughts. That shift in status is brutal, and it should be. Nikki's eventual intervention, if it comes, should not be clean or inspiring at first. It should be heartbreaking. She would not come to him as a lecturer, but as someone who knows exactly how addiction teaches a person to hate the hand reaching out to help. She would see herself in him and despise that truth. She might remember every relapse, every broken promise, every public humiliation, every private plea that once made her feel less than human. That memory would make her gentle in some moments and savage in others. Because love in this context is not softness. Sometimes love is the refusal to keep participating in the lie. Sometimes the most merciful thing a parent can do is stop making room for denial.